When Darth Vader lost to Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar, in Revenge of the Sith, the newly appointed Sith Lord would catch fire on the lava bank and was instantly engulfed in flames. The immolation of Vader on Mustafar is crucial to his character arc because it truly represented the physical manifestation of Anakin's fall to the dark side of the Force. The burning Vader endured marked the symbolic death of Anakin Skywalker as the young slave boy from Tatooine who dreamed of becoming a great Jedi warrior was essentially destroyed and replaced by Vader. The suffering and pain Vader went through also served as a turning point where he fully embraced the dark side. In the Legends novel, The Rise and Fall of Darth Vader, we are shown in incredible detail what Darth Vader was thinking as he burned on Mustafar, as well as when he was rebuilt into his cybernetic life support armor. Let's get right into it. Anakin's clothes caught fire, and he was suddenly engulfed in flames. His screams were filled with anger as well as pain. His instinct was to roll and put out the flames, but because of his wounds and the red-hot stones beneath his ravaged head and torso, all he could do was burn and burn. Obi-Wan walked off, leaving Anakin to die. Somehow, through his agony, Anakin felt one last flicker of Obi-Wan's presence before the Jedi Master receded from his view. Anakin kept screaming. The flames finally burned out. Anakin's mechanical right arm dug into the sand. He pulled and slid a few millimeters up the slope. Again, he thought. With each small movement, hot volcanic shards scraped and tore at his roasted flesh. It took all of his concentration and power to shift his scorched remains up the slope and away from the lava river. He moaned. Only his powers in the dark side of the Force kept him from blacking out. Again, he thought. Only his hatred for Obi-Wan made him want to live another day. Anakin. He still thought of himself as Anakin. He then heard the engine of an arriving starship travel over his position. He had no idea how much time had passed before he heard a clone trooper's voice call out, "Your Majesty, this way." Then he heard Palpatine's voice. There he is. He is still alive. Anakin's blackened torso went completely limp as he finally allowed darkness to sweep over him. Anakin awoke on an operating table, surrounded by medical droids. The recently appointed Emperor Palpatine had brought him to a surgical reconstruction center on Coruscant, and the droids were busily attaching robotic limbs to his quivering torso, which was strapped to the table by strong metal belts. The droids were working fast to maintain the precious midichlorians that still existed in Anakin's blood and tissue. To prevent the midichlorians from becoming thinned by intrusive metals and chemicals, the droids were working without anesthetics. Anakin felt everything. He felt each cold metal blade that sliced into his hideously scarred flesh to allow more tools to probe and stabilize his damaged internal organs. He squirmed as his shattered bones were replaced by plastoid, and cringed as lasers grafted the new limbs into place. At some point, he overheard a surgical droid explaining to his master Palpatine that he would require a special helmet and backpack to cycle air in and out of his damaged lungs. Despite this damage, throughout the entire process, he never lost consciousness and he never stopped screaming. Finally stabilized, Anakin lay quietly on the table to which he was still secured. He was clad in a gleaming black life support suit with a lighted control function panel set across his chest. He watched as a robot mechanism above his head slowly lowered a black mask with oval vision receptors and a triangular respiratory vent over his face, while another mechanism placed a helmet over his skull. The helmet and mask locked onto each other as they simultaneously bolted to the armored ring that wrapped around his neck. Fully encased within the pressurized suit, he heard a labored, mechanical rasp, then realized it was the sound of his own breathing. The table then suddenly tilted, raising Anakin's restrained body to a standing position. From the shadows of the operating room, the hooded Emperor stepped forward and said, "Lord Vader, can you hear me?" Vader? That's right. I am Darth Vader. Anakin is gone, he thought. Vader exhaled, then said, "Yes, Master." The masked vocabulator had transformed his voice into a commanding baritone. He still felt extremely weak, so it was with some difficulty that he slowly turned his head, adjusting his vision through the helmet to better see the Emperor. The Emperor's face was gnarled and twisted, deformed by the Sith lightning that had briefly been deflected by Mace Windu during their battle. "Where is Padme?" Vader said in his new voice. After everything that happened, he was still concerned for her. He still loved her. He still wanted to save her life. "Is she safe? Is she alright?" In his most sympathetic tone, Palpatine said, "It seems, in your anger, you killed her." I couldn't have," Vader said with disbelief. "I loved her. I did everything I could to save her." His mind's voice sounded strange to him, weaker than the synth-sized roll of thunder that emitted from his mask. He recalled choking Padme on Mustafar, watching her body crumple and fall on the landing pad. "I didn't mean to," Vader snarled. "She was alive. I felt it." Palpatine took a cautious step backward as Vader moaned with grief and rage. Around the laboratory, equipment and droids began to rupture and burst as Vader lashed out in all directions with his force powers. There was a loud snap of metal as he tore his left arm free from the table, then his right. He lurched forward on alloy legs that were fitted into cumbersome boots until he stood at the edge of the surgical floor. And somehow, through all his anger, he suddenly sensed at least one truth. Padme was dead, along with their unborn child. "No," he bellowed so loud and long that his cry echoed off the walls. Behind his mask, he squeezed his eyes shut in an effort to hold back the tears that he was physically unable to wipe away, but no tears came. He didn't know whether the surgical droids had altered or removed his tear ducts, and he was beyond caring. All he knew for certain was that Padme was gone from him forever, and that there were a few more Jedi still waiting to be killed. Devoid of love for anyone, and unable to feel the touch of anything through his gloved, cybernetic fingers, Darth Vader was finally ready to fully embrace the dark side, and so he did. Even though Darth Vader had convinced himself that he had killed Anakin Skywalker, this was never truly the case, as Vader had failed to truly extinguish the spirit of Anakin Skywalker, and was unable to forget and let go of the past. This is highlighted beautifully in the Legends book, The Rise and Fall of Darth Vader, where Vader reunites with Anakin's protocol droid, C-3PO, during the events of The Empire Strikes Back on Cloud City, and is ultimately forced to remember his past. Let's get right into it. The Millennium Falcon has landed on Platform 327, Lord Vader, said Lieutenant Shekel, a gray-uniformed Imperial officer. Princess Leia is with Captain Solo and his co-pilot Wookiee. Shekel continued. There's a droid too. The officer remarked that it was lucky the Falcon's hyperdrive was damaged, or the Empire would not have reached the Bespin system before the rebels. Vader assured him luck had nothing to do with their journey to Bespin, and told Shekel to remind his men to stay out of sight. Shekel then returned with a pair of stormtroopers who carried an open-top container that held the captured droid's parts. The limbs had been torn from the torso, and a tangle of multicolored wires stuck out from the droid's neck socket. Lord Vader, Shekel said, I am afraid the damage is quite extensive. Holding the droid's head up for Vader's inspection, Shekel continued, as you can see, it is a protocol droid, probably the princess's property. Vader took the head and examined it closely. Shekel told Vader that it is likely the droid was made a long time ago. Despite the wear and tear to the droid's head, Darth Vader recognized a few small details that indicated Anakin Skywalker's handiwork. He then gazed into the decapitated head's blank photoreceptors. It was C-3PO. The last time Vader had seen the golden droid was on Mustafar. "I saw you through the window of Padme's starship as it landed," Vader recalled. Holding this relic of his former life, Vader felt waves of anger and loss sweep over his dark soul. His memory quickly flashed to the day that Anakin had found the droid's skeleton in Watto's junkyard, and Anakin wondered if the repaired droid might help him and his mother leave Tatooine. Vader wondered whether C-3PO remembered anything of Anakin Skywalker. He doubted it. If the droid had any knowledge of Anakin Skywalker in his memory banks, then he would have shared the knowledge with his son Luke Skywalker. But Luke still remained ignorant of his father's true identity. Vader felt certain of that. All things considered, Vader thought, as he looked into the droid's eyes, "I should have left you in that scrapyard." He had the sudden urge to crush the droid's head, but then quickly realized that Shekel and the bounty hunter Boba Fett were watching him curiously. Shekel said, "Shall our technicians attempt to recover the unit's memory, Lord Vader?" Relaxing his grip on the droid's head, Vader placed it with the other parts in the open container. "The droid is useless," he said. "Have it destroyed immediately." He didn't give the droid another thought as he turned for the door and requested Boba Fett to come with him. Before Vader knew it, Shekel had chased him down and told the Sith Lord that their search of Princess Leia's quarters had turned up something unexpected. On top of a table rested a storage bin that held C-3PO's dismembered parts. "We meet again," Vader thought. Staring at the parts, which looked no different from when he had last seen them, Vader said, "I gave an order, Lieutenant." He then told Vader that the Wookiee had broken into the junk room and went berserk when he found the droid parts. He brought them here, straight to the princess. If the rebellion is interested in preserving this unit, there may be more to this droid than meets the eye. Reaching into the storage bin, Vader picked up the droid's head. Despite his desire to leave all of Anakin Skywalker's memories buried, another one surfaced. Something Shmi Skywalker had told her son after she allowed him to keep the droid parts he had secretly hauled into their tiny hovel. She had said, "Unless you're prepared to take care for something, you don't deserve to have it." Behind his helmet, Vader winced at the recollection. Watching Vader, Shekel said, "Shall I instruct the technicians to search its memory?" When Vader didn't answer, Shekel added, "Or would you rather have the Ugnaughts smelt the thing?" Vader seemed to continue contemplating the droid's head, holding it closer to his helmet so he could see his dark, distorted reflection on the weathered gold surface of C-3PO's lifeless face. "Sir," Shekel said. Darth Vader slowly placed the droid's head with the other parts. The droid's parts carried the stench of Captain Solo's co-pilot. Deliver this box to the Wookiee cell. Shekel did not understand. "You want the prisoner to have the droid?" "I am giving the Wookiee what he deserves," Vader said mysteriously. "Yes, of course, Lord Vader," Shekel said. He told Shekel that Captain Solo has an appointment in the interrogation chamber, and to make sure he gets there. In the years after Anakin Skywalker left Tatooine with Qui-Gon Jinn to become a Jedi on Coruscant, Anakin's mother Shmi would be sold by Watto to a moisture farmer named Lars, who would eventually marry her. Unfortunately, in his care, Shmi would be taken by native Tusken Raiders and tortured until she died in her son Anakin's arms, as he finally reunited with her after 10 years. When Anakin eventually fell to the dark side and became Darth Vader, Obi-Wan Kenobi would take Anakin's son to Owen and Beru, and they would be entrusted to raise and take care of Anakin's son Luke as their own. Owen and Beru would eventually meet their demise at the hands of the Empire in A New Hope. But did you know in Legends, Darth Vader himself actually ordered and watched the execution of Owen and Beru Lars? This is shown in the Legends novel, The Rise and Fall of Darth Vader. Let's get straight into it. After Vader's meeting with Grand Moff Tarkin and other Imperial generals and admirals concerning the Death Star plans and the Rebel Alliance, the Sith Lord was informed that he had an incoming message from the Tatooine system. Vader had already been notified that Commander Prodigy's Stormtrooper squad had learned that the Tantive V4's missing escape pod had carried 2 droids to Tatooine's surface, and that the droids had been picked up by a Jawa sandcrawler. Vader then walked over to a communications console where a projector flickered to life and projected an image of two fully armed sand troopers standing beside a middle-aged man and woman who were kneeling on the ground. Near the four figures, there was a partial view of a structure which Vader immediately recognized as an entry dome for a desert dwelling. Addressing the sand trooper squad leader, Vader said, "Report via closed circuit." "Lord Vader," said one of the sand troopers, adjusting a control on his helmet so that only Darth Vader could hear his voice. He told Vader that the Jawas had sold a protocol droid as well as an astromech to the moisture farmers in custody, but both droids were gone and nowhere to be found. Moisture farmers, Vader thought. Intrigued, Vader examined the holograms of the kneeling couple and asked for the names of the farmers. "Owen and Beru Lars, sir," the sand trooper responded. Owen and Beru, Vader recalled. The resolution of their holograms was clear enough that he could make out their worn, weathered features. Neither one of them appeared to be comfortable having blaster rifles aimed at their backs. Remembering how they looked the day Anakin Skywalker met them, Vader thought, the years have not been kind. It is time for them to pay for their repeated weaknesses. "Your orders, sir?" said the sand trooper. "Tell Mr. and Mrs. Lars that they seem to have trouble keeping protocol droids on their property." Not certain if he had heard correctly, the sand trooper said, "Sir? Then you may extend to them every courtesy that you show the Jawas before you continue your search. Establish checkpoints to detain any droids entering Mos Espa or Mos Eisley spaceports." "And one more thing," Vader noted. "Yes, sir," the sand trooper said. "Do not stop transmitting the hologram until I break the connection." "Understood," said the sand trooper. Vader watched the sand troopers carry out his orders on their helpless victims. He found the sight of rising flames, even holograms of flames burning millions of light years away, to be most satisfying. When Owen and Beru and the entire Lars family homestead had been transformed into an inferno, Vader deactivated the holoprojector. He proceeded to the nearest lift tube and was quickly transported to sub-level 5 of detention area AA-23, which is reserved for political prisoners. It is time to talk with the princess, Vader thought. After Anakin Skywalker, now the Sith Lord Darth Vader's unexpected loss at the hands of Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar, Vader would have to live with not just the loss of his beloved wife Padme Amidala, but also the loss of his humanity. Impossible as it seemed, Vader had survived his severe injuries and burns, but living came at a great cost. He would forever be sealed into a life support suit in head-to-toe black armor, accompanied with 4 new cybernetic limbs. Although Darth Vader's new suit immediately struck fear into every Imperial officer the Sith Lord came across, you might be surprised to know that Vader absolutely hated his suit, and that's what today's video is about. And I will be using the Legends novel, Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader. This is everything that Darth Vader hated about his suit. Let's get started. To the galaxy at large, Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, poster boy for the war effort, the hero with no fear, the chosen one, had died on Coruscant during the siege of the Jedi Temple. And to some extent that was true. Anakin is dead, Vader told himself. And yet, if not for events on Mustafar, Anakin would sit now on the Coruscant throne, his wife by his side, their child in her arms. Instead, Palpatine's plan could not have been more flawlessly executed. He had won it all. The war, the Republic, the fealty of the one Jedi Knight in whom the entire Jedi Order had placed its hope. The revenge of the self-exiled Sith had been complete, and Darth Vader was merely a minion, an errand boy, allegedly an apprentice, the public face of the dark side of the Force. While he retained his knowledge of the Jedi arts, he felt uncertain about his place in the Force, and while he had taken his first steps toward awakening the power of the dark side, he felt uncertain about his ability to sustain that power. How far he might have been now had fate not intervened to strip him of almost everything he possessed as a means of remaking him, or of humbling him, as Darth Maul and Darth Tyrannus had been humbled before him, as indeed the Jedi Order itself had been humbled. Where Darth Sidious had gained everything, Vader had lost everything, including for the moment the self-confidence and skill he had demonstrated as Anakin Skywalker. Vader turned and started walking, but this is not walking, he thought. His alloy lower legs were bulked by strips of armor, which were very similar to those that filled and gave form to the long glove Anakin had worn over his right arm prosthesis. What remained of his real limbs ended in bulbs of grafted flesh inserted into machines that triggered movement through the use of modules that interfaced with his damaged nerve endings. But instead of using Durasteel, the medical droids had substituted an inferior alloy and had failed to inspect the strips that protected the electromotive lines. As a result, the inner lining of the pressurized bodysuit was continually snagging on places where the strips were anchored to knee and ankle joints. The tall boots were a poor fit for his artificial feet, whose claw-like toes lacked the sensitivity of his equally false fingertips. Raised in the heel, the footgear pushed him slightly forward, forcing him to move with exaggerated caution lest he stumble or topple over. Worse, they were so heavy that he often felt rooted to the ground, or as if he were moving in high gravity. What good was motion of this sort, if he was going to have to call on the Force to even walk from place to place? He may as well have resigned himself to using a repulsor chair and abandoned any hope of movement, Vader thought. The defects in his prosthetic arms mirrored those of his legs. Only the right one felt natural to him, though it too was artificial, and the mechanisms that supplied articulation and support were sometimes too slow to respond. The weighty cloak and pectoral plating so restricted his movement that he could scarcely lift his arms over his head, and he had already been forced to adapt his lightsaber technique to compensate for this. He could probably adjust the servo drivers and pistons in his forearms to provide his hands with strength enough to crush the hilt of his new lightsaber. With the power of his arms alone, Vader had the ability to lift an adult being off the ground, but the Force had always given him the ability to do that, especially in moments of rage, as he had demonstrated on Tatooine moments after his mother's death. To make matters worse, the sleeves of the bodysuit didn't hug the prosthesis as they should, and the elbow-length gloves sagged and bunched at his wrist. Gazing at the gloves now, he thought, this is not seeing. The pressurized mask was goggle-eyed, fish-mouthed, short-snouted, and needlessly angular over the cheekbones. Coupled with a flaring dome of a helmet, the mask gave him the forbidding appearance of an ancient Sith war droid. The dark hemispheres that covered his eyes filtered out light that might have caused further injury to his damaged corneas and retinas, but in an enhanced mode, the half-globes reddened the light and prevented him from being able to see the toes of his boots without inclining his head almost 90 degrees. Listening to the servo motors that drove his limbs, he thought, this is not hearing. The med droids rebuilt the cartilage of his outer ears, but his eardrums, having melted in Mustafar's heat, had been beyond repair. Sound waves now had to be transmitted directly to implants in his inner ear, and sounds registered as if issuing from underwater. Worse, the implanted sensors lacked sufficient discrimination, so that too many ambient sounds were picked up, and their distance and direction were difficult to determine. Sometimes, the sensors needled him with feedback, or attached echo effects to even the faintest noise, allowing his lungs to fill with air. He thought, this is not breathing. This is where the med droids had truly failed Vader. From a control box he wore strapped to his chest, a thick cable entered his torso, linked to a breathing apparatus and heartbeat regulator. The ventilator was implanted in his hideously scarred chest, along with tubes that ran directly into his damaged lungs, and others that entered his throat, so that should the chest plate or belt control panels develop a glitch, he could breathe unassisted for a limited amount of time. But the monitoring panel beeped frequently and for no apparent reason, and the constellation of lights served only as a steady reminder of his vulnerability. The incessant rap of his breathing interfered with his ability to rest, let alone sleep. And sleep, in the rare moments it came to him, was a nightmarish jumble of twisted, recurrent memories that unfolded to excruciating sounds. The med droids had at least inserted their redundant breathing tubes low enough so that with the aid of an enunciator, his scorched vocal cords could still form sounds and words. But absent from the enunciator, which imparted a synthetic bass tone, his own voice was little more than a whisper. Vader could take food through his mouth as well, but only when he was inside a hyperbaric chamber, since he had to remove the triangular respirator vent that was the mask's prominent feature, so it was easier to receive nourishment through liquids, intravenous and otherwise, and to rely on catheters, collection pouches, and recycles to deal with liquid and solid waste. But all those devices made it even more difficult for him to move with ease, much less with grace. The pectoral armor that protected the artificial lung weighed him down, as did the electrode-studded collar that supported the outsized helmet, necessary to safeguard the cybernetics devices that replaced the uppermost of his vertebrae, the delicate systems of the mask, and the ragged scars in his hairless head. The synthetic skin that substituted for what was seared from his bones itched constantly, and his body needed to be periodically cleansed and scrubbed of necrotic flesh. Already, Vader had experienced moments of claustrophobia, moments of desperation to be rid of the suit, to emerge from the shell. He needed to build, or have built, a chamber in which he could feel human again, if possible. All in all, he thought, this is not living. This was solitary confinement, prison of the worst sort, continual torture. He was nothing more than wreckage, power without clear purpose. When Luke Skywalker defeated his own father, Darth Vader, aboard the second Death Star, in Return of the Jedi, Luke would renounce the dark side, and Palpatine would go on to unleash a fury of Sith lightning upon Skywalker as Vader watched. Unable to let the Emperor kill his own son, Anakin would turn back to the light side and be redeemed, while also fulfilling the Chosen One prophecy. Anakin would betray the Emperor and save his son Luke. But have you ever wondered what Vader was thinking right before he turned back to the light side and grabbed the Emperor as he was about to kill Luke? The answer to this question is shown in the canon book, Skywalker, A Family at War. Let's get right into it. The savageness of Luke's attack surprised Vader, who was unprepared for Luke's explosive reaction. He pushed Vader backward and forced him into submission, raining a barrage of hacking slashes down on the cowering Sith Lord. Vader tried to defend himself, but one of Luke's powerful blows landed on Vader's wrist, severing the complex system of metal and wiring that allowed him to grip his weapon. Palpatine was able to recognize the spirit of his prized pupil Anakin Skywalker, reborn in his son Luke. Luke recognized it himself in Vader's defeat, but instead of following his father's brutal descent into darkness, Luke snapped out of his murderous trance, rejecting what he was in danger of becoming. Luke Skywalker was not so far gone that he could not turn back to the light. He had given in to hate, but it did not have to dominate his next decision. So in keeping with the principles of the Jedi, in the face of evil, Luke showed mercy. He lowered his weapon. Luke refused to kill his father, Darth Vader. Neither Palpatine nor Vader were prepared for this turn of events. Palpatine naturally saw Luke's refusal to dispatch Vader as weakness and unleashed his dark lightning, sending an agonizing current ripping through Luke's body. Vader watched as the bright lightning reflected off his mask. How often had Vader been on the receiving end of Palpatine's wrath during their many years as master and apprentice? Vader had lost count. Each attack had made him feel more powerless, more helpless, and more weak, thus even more a slave to Palpatine's whims. The only way to avoid such persecution was to do his master's bidding. And even when he did so, Vader realized he was at best rebuilt and at worst replaceable. There was no real trust between Vader and Palpatine, no sense of equality, and certainly no love. Palpatine had created him, named him, and controlled him, refusing to allow him any connection to the man he had been, the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker. As he sensed the danger of the humanity Vader had repressed, any small hint of Anakin Skywalker in Vader was met with pain. Darth Vader was made to serve or suffer. The good in him was suppressed by Palpatine's manipulations. The dark side of the Force demanded unquestioning loyalty and servitude, and Vader had done his best to satisfy both requirements. Yet still, Palpatine had treated him as nothing more than a weapon, and for more than 20 years, Vader had submitted to Palpatine, too damaged to defy him. But Luke, his son, offered a different choice. Luke had surrendered himself, faced down the Emperor, and even resisted the power of the dark side. He had spared Vader's life when it was his for the taking, and in doing so, Luke had paid the price. Another Skywalker made to endure Palpatine's tortures. Vader had thought that his allegiance to the Sith would make him stronger and more powerful, but Palpatine was like a creeping disease, infecting everything he touched. The Sith Lord had enforced Vader's loyalty through fear, pain, and cruelty. Anakin then realized he still had the ability to make a choice, his own choice, and in that exact moment, he chose his son. As Palpatine continued to unleash crackling jolts of dark lightning upon Luke, Vader seized the Emperor, and fighting through the energy blast penetrating his cybernetic suit, hurled his master down the Death Star's bottomless reactor shaft. Anakin Skywalker was 45 years old when he was able to finally fulfill the ancient Jedi prophecy of the Chosen One. By returning to the light side and helping his son vanquish the vile Sith Lord, balance was finally restored in the Force by helping his father turn back toward the light, offering him unconditional love. Luke had attained what his father and the entire Jedi Order, twisted by the Clone Wars, could not achieve. By refusing to fight, to destroy, to let anger eclipse the good in his heart, he had forgiven a monster and revealed a man. In Anakin's final moments, he crumpled beneath the weight of his suit, which was no longer able to assist his breathing. Luke gently removed Vader's helmet to reveal Anakin's pale, disfigured face, and found to his surprise that Anakin was smiling. At the end of his days, in the living Force, Anakin Skywalker was cradled by his own son. The body of the redeemed warrior was given a hero's funeral, but his spirit passed on, becoming part of the energy binding the galaxy. And it was Luke Skywalker who had glimpsed Anakin Skywalker's return to the cosmic force, a vision of Anakin at his best, a young man who was one of the greatest of all Jedi Knights, in harmony with his two greatest teachers, Master Yoda and Obi-Wan Kenobi. Thank you all so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video and learned something new, please like and subscribe. And remember, the Force will be with you, always.